I am just giving a couple of words of introduction and welcome to introduce Jennifer. And so thank you so much for joining us this morning, at least for us here in the East Coast of the United States. For those of you who don't know, this is the third webinar that we've convened around a series of themes of resiliency for civil society organizations. And Partners Global invested in a resiliency framework over about 3 years ago now, working with another global organization, Civicus, based in South Africa, looking at those organizations that were working under challenging circumstances of political challenges, closing civic space. And we never really realized how relevant the framework for resiliency would be for a different type of shock or a different type of unexpected difficulty that our sector would be facing, like the global health pandemic. And so we wanted to be sharing with our community, with our network of civil society actors, what we've been learning about resilient organizations. And so if you missed an introduction to the entire framework, a couple of weeks ago, I actually laid out all of the factors of resilient organizations. And every week we've been rolling out a different content series of more information, materials, expert advice on all of the different aspects of resiliency under our framework. One of those very important aspects is those organizations that have a resiliency ethos embedded within their organizational structure. There are 3 subcomponents underneath this framework of how organizations are institutionalizing resiliency, how they have a culture of resiliency, these kind of formal procedures and policies and informal practices within the organization. But the third component is around staff readiness and well-being, because so much of resiliency is about the ability to adapt quickly, to respond to your environment. And I think all of that adaptation and innovation takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of creative energy. I can personally speak to that, having now been in quarantine for 8 weeks here in BC. And if you're not really taking care of yourself and your team, you don't have the space for that adaptation and that innovation within your organization and within yourself. And so that's why we really wanted to prioritize having a conversation as our third in the series of looking at the resiliency factors of really prioritizing staff readiness and well-being. So it's such a joy and a privilege to have Jennifer Lynne with us here from the Contact Project. I'm not gonna try and give her due course with regards to a formal introduction. I'm going to let her introduce herself, but just to say she's been a friend and a colleague to Partners Global and the Alliance for Peace Building and many other networks, including Rotary International, for many years. And so I'm very grateful that she gave her time to talk to us today about this topic. So I've been mentioning some of these resources, my webinar that introduced the framework, and these content series. My colleague is including links to those in the chat if you'd like to check on those later. And then just by way of letting you know, we are filming the webinar today. It's in webinar mode, so really Jennifer's the one who's going to be on film. So if you'd like to kind of share with your colleagues at a later time, you know, this will live on in posterity. So I'm going to sign off and just say on behalf of Partners Global, thank you for making the time to be with us, and thank you to Jennifer for joining us.
Thank you, Julia. It was always good to see you, and I really appreciate the invitation to come and talk to everybody today. First, I just want to again say thanks to Julia and to Partners Global for putting this together, and more importantly, doing the heavy lifting in creating the Resiliency Plus framework. For those of us who are working in civic spaces and with organizations in international development and humanitarian aid and peace building, I'm sure that as we go over the framework, we see really how valuable the information in its entirety it is. I'd also like to just quickly say thank you to a behind the scenes person who's with us today. It's Allie Lyons, who's the Senior Advisor for Global Initiatives at PartnersGlobal, and she's providing some logistical, some web support for us. So just want to mention her contribution, and most importantly, thank you all for taking time out of your days. I believe we have participants from over about 30 countries. So that's a lot of different time zones, and you all have been very gracious to join me today to talk about something that I myself personally and the Contact Project are very passionate about. And essentially that's about resiliency in terms of staff readiness and well-being. So one of the things that I wanted to just kind of talk about right at the beginning is looking over what we're going to be actually kind of covering this afternoon. So we can just move to the second slide. You all might hear me give Allie a couple of prompts as we're moving through. So here we go. We'll have this come up. Yeah. So in today's discussion, what we're going to have is exploring essentially what resiliency and well-being mean. And we're looking at that through the lens that Julia and PartnersGlobal have created under the framework. I should say, just to keep things kind of together and make it easier for everyone so that we can kind of have some working definitions of what staff readiness, well-being, resiliency, and organizational readiness mean to us. The other thing that I want to really get into, and this is important, is to really take a look at the role of self-care and well-being for both individual and organizational resiliency. I want to take a little bit of time to talk about the brain and body connections. Some of you all might be familiar with that. There's been a lot coming out in terms of neuroscience and behavioral sciences around what happens when we're exposed to extended trauma or stress that can come so often with the work that we find ourselves doing. The next thing that we want to talk about is looking at understanding when and how staff readiness and well-being can be assessed. We had the opportunity for some of the participants to provide us with questions and prior to today. And so really what we're going to do here is try to look at how do we make the assessments, what can be done through leadership, through teams, and through individuals to help understand when or how and what the factors are that could influence staff readiness and well-being. And then, of course, we'll discover ways to include some of these practices and some of these methods into a broader resiliency framework. And just so that we're not spending the entire hour going through a PowerPoint and listening to me, we're going to have also the opportunity to engage in 2 self-care exercises. So that's an opportunity for us to actually take a break right now in real time and feel what it feels like to take a moment to address our own personal sense of resiliency and well-being. So what I'd like to do is kind of just talk a little bit about the Contact Project and what we've been up to. Over the last 12 years, the Contact Project has been deeply involved in ideas about resiliency, well-being, and sort of the intersections of neuroscience and peace building. what we have been working with, and it's our particular approach, and it's called the engaged identity approach. So essentially, this is our view of what human capacity looks like, and how do we develop the mental, the emotional, the physical, the mindset to be able to continue to broaden our reach and deepen our impact. So at the Contact Project, we do a bunch of different things: organizational team leadership and individual coaching, trainings and workshops. We have blended learning engagements that we use both e-learning and experiential learning as our backbones, and then some bespoke consultancy services. So the Contact Project's been around for about 15 years now, and we've had the opportunity to work with, I know, many of you who are out there in the ethos today. So just want to say thank you again for having us and the Contact Project be able to share this passion with you. So I think that probably the best thing to do is just to hop right into what do we mean by resiliency? And essentially what we're looking at are three definitions. We're going to look at individual resiliency, resiliency at large, and organizational resiliency. So when we talk about resiliency, the ability to adapt, to swiftly, purposefully, with their shock or impact, how are we able to pivot? How are we able to expand? How are we able to sustain the work that we're doing? And also importantly, how are we able to sustain ourselves when we're dealing with all of this uncertainty and so many changing parts of the system? So organizational resiliency, of course, is adaptive capacity to be able to have an entire organization be able to address these various functions and relationships that are like moving parts of one machine. And that becomes even more challenging. That's looking at staff readiness, well-being, the health of the organization, and the relationships both internally within the organization and, of course, externally with partners, funders, and participants and collaborators in our programming. So I want you all, because it is a seminar and we are virtual, we do have the chat box open. So if you all can see, you can set your chat setting to all panelists and attendees. And I would love to hear from you if you're having any reflections or insights or questions. We'll pause several times throughout the hour to address questions. But it would be great to kind of get a sense of community put together if we can have that sort of become an active space for you all to kind of see who's here and what our thoughts are around some of the things that we're, talking about. So when we think about resiliency, one of the factors that's paramount to that, of course, is staff well-being, staff readiness and well-being. Two different things, and I want to go into just a little bit what well-being looks like when we talk about well-being. So well-being can sometimes be considered this sort of very vague, esoteric well-being. Is it happiness, or is it I just feel good today? Is it just about me? Is it about me physically? Is it about my diet? So many of us now with the COVID-19 virus are working remotely. Our diets are changing. There are curfews and stay-at-home orders in place. And so some of our psychological, physical, and social habits and the things that actually help feed us and sustain us have been dramatically changed recently. But regardless if it's in times like this or if you're working in the field, well-being is always going to be an important component, both as an individual and as a team and staff member. Leadership in particular also oftentimes does not take the time to be able to actually develop practices that can help us in our quest to find that kind of work-life balance. So well-being is really looking at this combination of health and happiness, prosperity. If you feel like you have a sense of life satisfaction, maybe it's a sense of meaning or purpose. Oftentimes there's a heightened sense of creativity, a sense of gratitude. But generally, well-being will be combining feelings of contentment, and a sense of autonomy is usually very important, and that's a sense of control that we all would like to have over our daily activities, over our finances, over our work environments, and having a sense of purpose. So some of the methods and practices for well-being are thought of in terms of contemplative practices, or it could be dance or movement or exercise or diet. And all of these and more would be completely within sort of the umbrella of what contributes to well-being. But you can see that some of the things that we've listed here, like social and meaning making or relational aspects, these are all things that are coming directly from us engaging one another through our differences, through our diversities. And one of the things that's important, I think, for us to consider is how can we address our own well-being while we're also being mindful and compassionate towards the well-being of those around us. When we start talking about sort of a reciprocity of well-being is when we can kind of move into the staff readiness space. And staff readiness is really, has many of the same contributing factors, but also you're looking at things like safety and security issues, communication, access, infrastructure, organizational tools, personal team organizational mindset, and a well-being component as well. So when we talk about staff readiness, we're looking at logistics, right? Is there a safety and security plan in place? Is there internal and external clear lines of communication? What are the frameworks that are being utilized, both as an organization, but also as an individual? What is it that is making your day full? So what's your personal framework? It's just always something to really think about. Being adaptive. Or what is the level of collaboration? And what is the mindset? So staff readiness from an organizational standpoint is really giving the tools and the consideration to the safety and security and well-being of the staff that you have. And that doesn't have to be when we're just working, you know, on the ground in, you know, highly volatile or conflict zones. It's also available to us and really important when we're, you know, in our normal sort of home environment, maybe at the home office. And how are we able to help one another and create an environment that is secure, that's safe, that offers lines of communication, access, and a healthy mindset to increase both sustainability, impact, and resiliency. So if you guys have any questions, we're going to take a break in a few minutes and I'll answer some questions. But again, feel free to let me know if you have any thoughts that you want to share, both to us and to the rest of the participants, because we'd love to hear from you. It's always great to try to bring some sense of community into these situations. So we've been doing a lot of talking. I've been doing a lot of talking sort of about these definitions and what this is. Now the question is, why is this important to me and to my work? So essentially, organizations have a duty of care, right? This is, you see this, for example, the UN within the last year or two has partnered with Lululemon Athletics and several well-being practitioners to create a new program called Peace on Purpose, which is essentially a series of programming that is geared towards frontline UN workers. And it's really focusing on staff well-being, health, mindset. So at this point in the development of this space, many international companies and INGOs, as well as local and regional companies, have some type of well-being and readiness component as a part of their sort of HR or leadership strategic planning. So the other thing is sustainability, right? Burnout is a huge issue for so many of us, and working in situations that are uncertain, where there's safety and security issues, a sense of fear, it could be a lack of access. And really what we want to do is try to look at, and understand that in order to be sustainable, staff readiness and staff well-being are at the forefront. Because really, talking about on the resilience aspect, organizations are only as healthy as the people who actually are comprising them. So I can't impress upon you guys enough, it's just, we've all felt it. We all know how that feels. You walk in, you're exhausted, maybe you're someplace, there's a compromise in terms of if it's infrastructure, or there's some difficulty within the team, a lack of communication. It could be, a new working environment like so many of us are dealing with now, on top of our normal daily concerns of family, children, finances, and just a sense of what the future holds. So really, we're looking at why this is important as being a part of this assisting organizations and individuals to not just survive, but to also thrive. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about those two components a little bit later in our talk. So in terms of the impact, this is another issue, and I've said this, but I want to go back and talk about this, because when we're dealing with a healthy organization and healthy individuals, what that really contributes to is resilient, adaptive, creative, healthy teams. So from an organizational standpoint, or from an HR standpoint, this really, what we're talking about, and in terms of consistency of programming, really is talking about things like time, money, turnover, and impact. So being able to contribute not only to your own individual well-being, but also to the organizational well-being really does allow for an organization to maintain a sense of continuity while it's actually looking to increase its impact. And one of the things that I feel that's so overlooked in this is that when we talk about increasing impact organizationally, that doesn't mean, particularly in times like we're dealing with now, sometimes we are just not going to be able to, for various factors, we are simply not going to be able to engage in the same workloads or keep the same hours that we normally keep. So really what this is talking about is about also embracing flexibility, right? And managing and changing expectations when we're working with various factors that create stress or high stress or instability to our work environment. So we have a couple of thoughts that are coming through on the chat that I just want to address. Yeah, so thanks, Neil, for this. Neil from CDA Collaborative Learning's asking, what specific recommendations do you have for leaders to walk the talk when it comes to creating conditions for staff readiness? And I think that this is twofold, Neil. One, there needs to, a leader can, and a leader can only lead so much. There's got to be internal structure that actually supports these kinds of programs. Be that a particular individual as a well-being officer, or in a strategic planning, that well-being and staff readiness are already in place in terms of programming and methodology. And as far as leaders are concerned, I think it's important to balance that, the autonomy that comes with running an organization and finding a ways to create what I would call human leadership. So oftentimes, you know, we're so busy running programs, chasing down funding, trying to meet deadlines in terms of leadership, that there's, one, not a lot of time to try to develop relationships, and two, a question of what kinds of relationships are healthy to develop. So for example, in order to walk the talk, if you're leaving the office at 5 o'clock one day because you're going to go take a run, it's good to let people know that and remind them, hey, what are you doing? You know, so leading by example and sharing some of the exercises, not literal exercises, but sharing some of the things that you do as a person to help with your own well-being and your sense of readiness. And I think in terms of specifically staff readiness, just making sure that all of those policies are in place, and creating the time in meetings to be able to really go over those and make sure that people understand that the organization has a genuine interest and investment in their staff feeling safe, secure, and creating a sense of well-being. Yeah, so then we have another question coming in around this, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later, but Eastern philosophies, the question or the statement is, Eastern philosophies of well-being depend more on spiritual aspect. So how do we factor this into the framework and assess well-being? And this is a fantastic question, so thanks for bringing that up. We're going to talk a lot, just a little bit, about what it's like to translate some of these ideas, because every culture and really every individual is going to have their own sort of meaning making and value system. It's important to try to create programs that allow for the cultural, religious, and even, you know, educational or value systems that staff are going to, you know, that are represented by staff. Sorry. Okay, we see Neil. Yes, it takes more than the leader. Yeah. Yeah, now is a good time to explore whether you have the readiness infrastructure in place. Yeah, you know, and that's it. And this is something that a lot of times, Neil, that's sometimes a lot of times areas where there's a little bit of, you know, lax, in, at least in addressing, even if it is actually created and enveloped into the strategic planning, you may not see it get a lot of attention in terms of revisiting that in meetings or having any updates. So it's just, I think, really important to, again, put this as a top priority. Both of these, well-being and staff readiness, absolutely mandatory for running a resilient organization in the civic space or anywhere else, and particularly in the civic space. So yeah, as we are dealing with these ideas of well-being and looking at the context, because each person obviously is going to have their own interests, their own values, organizations are going to have their own values. And so how do we manage to talk about these different things and sort of translate what well-being and staff readiness are in terms of having that be meaningful and making meaning for staff? So I tell you what, let's take a minute and let's see if there's any questions. We had a couple of prepared questions real quick, so I'm just going to answer a few of those. And one of them is, how can organizations be most effectively addressing staff and mental health during COVID-19? And I think that it's important to address that right now. And again, this is one of the reasons, kind of going back to our question from Neil, this is about having structures in place. So many organizations right now are being caught off guard. One, you can't anticipate certain events happening. But what we can is try to find some frameworks that are already within our organizations and that we've developed to deal with certain aspects of stressors towards our staff readiness and well-being. So at this stage, I think it's great to have if you're looking to how to, address this issue of staff mental health, I think it's really important. One, we always have to think about the privacy of the individuals and the context. In certain countries, talking about psychology is not as prevalent and may even be problematic. So there are questions around how can you do check-ins with staff and find out, what do we need? Do we need to take, 30 minutes to have someone come in and talk about how to set up a healthy workspace in the home environment? Do we need to have a 15-minute chat about teams reimagining what their expectations are? Or it could be something as simple as setting up an opportunity for staff to gather. One of the things that always goes by the wayside when you move to remote working situations, be it because of COVID-19 or because you're away from your home office or in the field, is this sense of community. So another way to kind of address this mental health issue at this point is to set up, if you haven't already, some opportunities for your staff to get together. Maybe it's a coffee chat. Maybe it's, a virtual card game. It could be something, something away from the work product space that allows people to kind of regroup as human beings and have a shared experience as a team, but outside of kind of the working context. So there's been a lot of talking, and now I really would love to give you guys an opportunity to share in an exercise. So I'll ask you to just kind of clear your minds and try to quiet your environment if you can. Have a little privacy if that is possible. And I want to do something with us. It's just going to take a couple of minutes, and it's just a breathing break. So even taking a few minutes to regulate your breath and check in with your breathing. Many people will talk about breathing exercises, breathing techniques, meditation, pranayama, and all of that is absolutely fantastic. And sometimes I literally have, I don't know about you all, but I literally have 2 or 3 minutes as I'm hopping between project or event. And how can I kind of check in and recenter myself and sort of re-energize myself and clear up my head to, have that last ounce of creativity available. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what happens when we change our breathing after we finish doing the exercise. But for now, what I'd like you all to do is just join me. And just sit upright with a straight back and your gaze halfway to the ground, or your eyes closed if that's something better for you. And what I'd like us to do is just feel where your breath is coming from. Maybe you feel it in the front of your chest, or maybe you feel it in the back. I have a tendency to breathe in the front of my chest. So see if you can close your eyes and take a big breath in. Hold it. 2, 3, 4. Exhale. Inhale again. Hold it. And exhale. This time, take your breath and focus it on the back. So take your breath all the way back between your shoulder blades. Inhaling now. exhaling. Now in the next 3 breaths, we're going to inhale and exhale forcefully. So inhaling, exhaling through the mouth. And 2, inhaling and exhaling through the mouth. And inhaling one more time. And really let it out with force. Check in with your body. Maybe your fingers are tingling a little bit. Maybe you notice some tension between your shoulder blades when your breath went to the back. Maybe your eyesight, if your eyes were closed, maybe the light seems bright to your visual cortex. Check in for a minute with yourself and see how you feel. So in just a few minutes, this was 90 seconds of intentional breathing. One of the things that happens is oxygen is increased to the brain, which aids in our prefrontal cortex and executive function. And CO2, particularly when we're exhaling through the mouth, helps rebalance our fight, flight, or freeze limbic brain system. So when we're releasing more CO2, it actually is having a neurophysiological effect, not only on our bodies, but also on our mental capabilities. So even in a few minutes, if you need to find some space just to not react to a situation immediately, or maybe you're coming close to a deadline, or maybe you're in a situation where your safety and security, there's an issue of risk. Taking a minute to breathe will not only calm your central nervous system, but it will actually increase your ability to use your executive function and your decision making and your creativity. So thanks for sharing that with me. If anybody has any thoughts or feelings about what we just experienced, please put them in the chat box for me. I'd love to share them with your colleagues and address any questions or reflections that you may have. So I want to talk just a little bit about some of these factors, right? You've heard me talk about safety and security, crisis and trauma, difference and diversity, and really even just simple changes, right? So many of us are feeling that now. We live at home, but we're not used to working at home, or we're not used to spending this much time with our loved ones. So there's so many factors of change and uncertainty. This can be a loss of control. It could be a closing of civic spaces. It could be organizational issues. Maybe there's funding issues, or it could be change management situations. But the difference in diversity also really plays a part in terms of, look at us now with over 30 people from 30 countries joining on this one webinar. We're talking about a global workforce and becoming more interconnected. And sometimes difference in diversity can be pretty threatening to our sense of well-being because of different culture, because of different languages, between attitudes and beliefs. And so part of developing well-being and staff readiness is addressing the factors around engaging difference and diversity. So earlier in the talk, I mentioned that there were kind of 2 sides to this coin: the survive side and the thrive side, right? A lot of times when people think about well-being, they think about, oh, I need to, again, eat healthy, or I need to take care of myself, or I need to meditate, or I need to exercise. But some of the well-being isn't just about maintenance. It's also about creating opportunities for you to enhance your innovative qualities, your creativity, mind wandering. These are some of the times when we're able to be the most creative and the most innovative. And we need to make sure that during these times of crisis, we're also cultivating an appreciation for setting time aside to kind of just feel what we're feeling. So many of us are feeling overwhelmed by the changes. and completely, sometimes even paralyzed by what the future can bring. There's so much uncertainty. And being able to take a few minutes just to remember what you do have through gratitude, or perhaps it's looking what you have around you that you still, you have control of, your schedule, reinstilling a sense of autonomy and control in your situation, even in small ways, can play a huge part. And I'll give you a quick example from experience. Several years ago, I did a lot of work in northeastern Nigeria. And this was around the time that the Chibok girls had been taken. And I was moving quite frequently, from village to village, and my living circumstances were something I was not accustomed to. I was very, very much out of my physical, emotional, and mental sort of comfort level. But one thing I did is my toothbrush and my sunscreen and my hair ties, I put in the same place on my sink in whatever bathroom I had, everywhere I went. Now, why? Is that just being OCD? No, it's because having a ritual allows you to feel like you have some continuity, some control. So knowing that I always had my toothbrush and I always had my sunscreen, I always had my hair tie right where I knew they would be in the midst of the chaos that was northeastern Nigeria during that specific time, helped me feel like I had a little bit of control. So rituals can be a big part of well-being, and organizations can instill rituals in their well-being sort of framework, right? There are certain things you can do, be it we always check in 10 minutes ahead of time on before at the beginning of a meeting to kind of do a temperature check on how everyone's really doing on the human level, not just doing in terms of meeting deadlines. So there are many ways that we can find ways to kind of create ritual into bringing back our sense of self-control and autonomy during these times. Emergency situations, personal or familial, or team injuries, obviously things like COVID-19, these really, we all become kind of sort of in a heightened state of awareness. And sometimes that heightened state of awareness can make us very laser focused and help contribute to getting quite a bit done. But hypervigilance, of course, is not something that is either sustainable or conducive to well-being and resiliency. So safety and security, of course, we've discussed this. But we can even talk about it right now in terms of the workplace and your work environment. If you're working from home or in the office, are you creating a space for yourself, that is, makes you feel good, right? So I'll show you where I'm sitting. Right now, I didn't mention this, but right now I'm talking to you from southern Turkey. I am in actually southwestern Turkey, and I've been here for several years on and off as my home base. But one of the things I try to do for my well-being are those roses. So the garden, there's a garden near where I live, and I like to try to do something for my workspace to bring in something that helps me just soften the edges in my case a little bit. So all of these different components, it may seem so silly, it may seem so easy, it may seem so insignificant, but I promise you, if you really do start incorporating some of these practices, make one change in your daily routine or in your organization, this can make an enormous difference, and you start building on that. Yeah, okay, so I just want to stop for 1 second because I see that Bridget, one of our participants, has a great question. What practical tips do you have for people and leaders to prioritize, staff well-being when the rubber meets the road? It's easy to say we prioritize staff well-being, but how do we put words into action when deliverables don't stop despite a global pandemic? Yeah, and really, Bridget, of course, I would be dishonest if I didn't say, these times, like so many, but this in particular for so many of us, is so challenging, working with trying to meet deadlines in this changing landscape when, we really don't have kind of our ground game, so to speak, organizationally. And I think, one of the things, there are always 5 minutes in a day. And it may seem like it's a wasted 5 minutes, but if there's a team meeting, if there's the weekly check-in, if there is, hey, everybody leave, 15 minutes early today, or take 15 minutes extra, during a lunch break, if that's something that you all are scheduling in, depending, what's happening, and giving people just a small amount of time with kind of the suggestion of, hey, we want you to take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and go do something for yourself. And having that instruction come from team leaders or leadership, or built into the organization's, kind of weekly schedule for deliverables. Again, I promise, if you will put the time in on the front end for this, you will save more than 15 minutes, at the end. If you put 15 in, you'll get 20 in the back end in terms of meeting those deliverables. So it's really, again, it's putting this as a priority and not being scared to say, we have to have this time. It's like running a car without oil, right? You can run the car and it's going lower and lower, but eventually you're going to need to put some oil. So if you're always kind of topping off, you don't have that issue. Well, we kind of run the same way. We just need to create a little bit of time to sort of top off our oil. And we have another question that just came in: how to build staff responsibility within this flexibility. Yeah, this is a really great question. And again, this has to do a lot with the organizational psychology. This has, and I think that the Resiliency Plus framework talks about this. This has a lot to do with building trust. And there are some accountability sort of mechanisms that can be put into place. For example, let's use, sort of this technique that I just talked about. If you say to staff, hey, we're going to give you 15 extra minutes at lunch today, or 15, leaving early from the schedule of what we had, programmed, and then ask them to do a report, the next time you guys come together next week, can you just give us 2-3 minutes on, what have you been doing for well-being this week? And to actually schedule time in. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in terms of what leadership team and individuals can do in terms of this idea of accountability. So I do just want to talk briefly about this, what's happening sort of on a neurophysiological level. Things that are happening that are contributing to your well-being, of course, there's a huge, and so many of us are familiar with this, and even if you're not, the implications of well-being and why so many international organizations are now running, well-being consultants or in-house well-being directors or staff, are because there are proven scientific study after study now around what's happening with the limbic brain, the visual cortex. Particularly, so much of us are spending so much time right now on a video screen, right? We're just screen heavy. And what happens when we are in this virtual space for so long? It's exhausting, right? So many of us are so tired from taking meetings and working all day two-dimensionally like this. And there's the science behind that is that our visual cortex is usually picking up lots of different cues. So not just from the head up, but there's other body language, there is lighting, there's all kinds of different factors that are coming into how we're absorbing and understanding information. Same thing, even if it's, doing a lot of just audio conferencing. We don't have our full range of senses available in order to process and intake information. And so the systems that are able to work during this time are having to work triple time in order to get us the same response, which is one of the reasons why so many of us have, quote unquote, Zoom fatigue. So I talked about CO2 and oxygen and why breathing and checking in with some, we could use the term mindful, but we could also just say attentive or presencing, right? So all of these factors, and I'll have some support materials that will be available to you guys afterwards if you are interested in looking at various studies or learning more about the science behind this. One of the last things I want to talk about, and this of course was one of the first things that was addressed, was kind of how does this fit into these different contexts, if it's cultural differences or if it's spirituality and well-being. I think that through the talk, I hope that I've raised up some ideas around how to present this to staff and to leadership, depending on where you are in your organization or in your own life as an individual. Well-being isn't just about an increase in spirituality or an increase in your yoga or contemplative practices. Well-being is really about a duty of care to your colleagues, to your staff, and to yourself. It's about creating value for yourself and understanding that different people share different values and beliefs. So the question becomes, through a cultural context, how can we translate these meanings, right? Some people are very interested, for example, in the neuroscience. So when I am working with, C-suite executives, I'm giving a lot of information on the neurophysiological aspects of this, because that really has meaning for them in terms of why they should be participating in these activities. Whereas when I'm working with some of our colleagues and collaborators in Jos, Nigeria, we're really looking at using a lot about their religious beliefs. We're looking at cultural beliefs, and really using a lot of narrative and storytelling to kind of bring about these ideas about, hey, tell me about when you were angry with someone and said something that you didn't mean to say. And people will give me a story about when they were reactionary and said something that they later regretted. And it gives me an opportunity to explain to them why doing something like this breathing exercise we've just done, and just taking 90 seconds, to be able to give yourself, if not longer, a break, what that can do in terms of you having to then go back and fix a situation, not only the harm that originally was being addressed, but then the words that were said that, were regretted. So these kinds of things, and learning how to do that is something that you can talk with your staff about. Of course, there are people like myself in the Contact Project, and PartnersGlobal, working with assessments, working with coaching, working with creating frameworks for organizations and for leadership and individuals on a more tailored, personal level. So we've got just about, so a couple of people, that's right. Yeah, so we've got a few people weighing in about books or resources on well-being in workplace content and context. And then we also have some, asking about a question that came in earlier was looking at, are there specific, brain body exercises that can help with stress? So at the end of this, within the next couple of days, we'll have some, and I'm sure Ali can help me get this to you guys. We'll have a list of organizations, research materials, and also programs that look at directly some of these issues. As far as I know, well, there are very few that are doing work specifically tailored to the civic space. I'll just say that. But regardless, the information, and particularly in the work environment, can translate quite nicely. The important thing to remember when you get these resources, guys, and when you're listening to me talk, is this is just the beginning. This is really a 4-month intervention that we're talking about in like in like 60 minutes. So I encourage you to reach out to Julia, to Partners Global, to myself. We'll try to get you some more information and assist you as you guys are bringing this into your organizations and into your own lives personally. So now we've got just like 4 minutes left, and I want to do one quick I want to do one, if we have time. One more little quick exercise. One more. Yeah. So let's do a get present break before we break. And one of the things is, really what this is again, you guys, I'm giving you just some fast, snap, immediate kind of little tricks of the trade, and there are hundreds. But one of the things we can do is a get present break. What this does is it increases our attention to our body sensations, which helps reset the nervous system. This again is another mechanism to help you gain a sense of control and get back in the moment. Be it because you're in the meeting and the mind is wandering. It could be because you're trying to assess the security situation around you, but you're not, sort of having some tunnel vision around your own personal space. So very, very quickly, if you just want to sit up straight, your feet are on the ground. Most of you probably, well, I don't know, in this day and age with all of this Zooming going on, some of you may not have shoes on. So if you feel the ground with your feet, great. Otherwise, maybe you can try just putting your hands on your thighs when you're sitting up straight, and feel the palms of your hands against your thighs. And close your eyes and wiggle your fingers. You feel your fingertips. You can feel the weight of your fingertips wiggling against you can feel it on your thigh. Now open your eyes. Now your visual cortex is stimulated. You should notice a little difference there. Now I can still feel my fingertips and my thighs, but I don't feel it quite as intensely because I'm also taking in this information through my visual cortex, right? So close your eyes again. And you probably feel an increased focus into your fingertips. Okay, we can stop and you can open your eyes. Again, what's the point of this? Sometimes when we need to refocus ourselves, creating a physical outlet for built up energy can allow us to kind of discharge some of the mind wandering and scatter that goes on. So when we're able to just take a moment and go, oh, right, yeah, that's my fingertip. Hold on, I'll do it on my shoulder. And I feel that. And so this is kind of a Gestalt, Feldenkrais sort of a mind-body exercise as a way for you to be able to just check in and get away from the two-dimensionality of the screen. And remember that you actually have a body, right? Because that's part of what's making us so tired during the day. So I would just love to say thank you, first of all, for everybody joining us and taking the time. And obviously, there's so much more we could do, and different settings, particularly in person. And e-learning settings that are self-paced really create different learning opportunities. But for now, we have this. So if you would all just feel free to reach out to us at the Contact Project. Again, I would just like to say thank you to Partners Global and to all of you for joining us. It has been absolutely fantastic to kind of introduce or refresh or raise some questions up on this. And I hope you all take care. And I'm looking forward to seeing you all. Please do reach out.
So I just wanted to beam back in and say a special thank you, Jennifer, and thanks to all the participants for joining us. We will absolutely send out these resources that you mentioned that we'll be compiling when we also send a thank you to everyone who joined us and signed up but couldn't join us. So, look for that email, stay in connection with each other, please. As Jennifer was saying, it's not just our own well-being, it's also how we're caring for each other. And so we look forward to staying in close touch with all of you. Thank you again for joining us, and thank you, Jennifer.
Thanks so much, Julia. Take care, everyone. Be well.